My parents sold my 8-year-old daughter's rare book collection, the one she inherited from my great-grandmother Nana Rose, for $200,000 just to buy a home theater for my sister's kids. When Catherine found out, she did not cry. She simply smiled and whispered a secret that made my parents' faces go ghost white. Before I tell you how my quiet daughter terrified my entire family, I need you to understand that this was not just about books. It was about erasing history. My name is Naya, and I am 34 years old. As a professional archivist, my life revolves around preserving the past, but apparently my parents, Desmond and Patrice, were determined to destroy mine. If you are watching this from a place where family loyalty is used as a weapon, let me know in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your children from the people who were supposed to love them the most. The Atlanta heat was suffocating that Tuesday afternoon. It was the kind of humidity that wrapped around you like a wet wool blanket, making the air thick enough to chew on. I steered my sedan up the long paved driveway of my parents' house, feeling that familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. This two-story brick colonial in the suburbs was supposed to be a sanctuary. It was supposed to be the place where I could rest while my new house was being renovated. Instead, for the past 3 months, it had felt like a museum where I was the clumsy guest constantly on the verge of breaking something valuable. My daughter Catherine was bouncing in the back seat. She had just spent 2 weeks at a sleepaway STEM camp, her first time away from home for that long. Her braids were clicking together as she bobbed her head, clutching her backpack to her chest. "I cannot wait to see Nana Rose's shelf, Mom," she chirped, her voice full of that innocent excitement that only an 8-year-old possesses. I missed the smell. You know how the leather smells like vanilla and old wood? I want to finish reading the Zora Neale Hurston book before school starts. I smiled at her in the rearview mirror, though the knot in my stomach tightened. Catherine was an old soul. While her cousins were obsessed with TikTok and video games, Catherine was obsessed with the legacy my great-grandmother Nana Rose had left her. It was a massive collection of first editions and rare manuscripts from the Harlem Renaissance. Nana Rose had been a domestic worker her whole life, invisible to the world, but she had spent every spare dime preserving the voices of our people. She had bypassed my parents and me entirely in her will, leaving the collection specifically to Catherine, claiming that my daughter had the spirit to protect them. We pulled up to the garage. The house looked perfect from the outside. The lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life. The hedges were trimmed into sharp geometric shapes, and the windows gleamed. It was a picture of upper-middle-class success. But as I turned off the engine, I felt a strange heaviness. It was too quiet. Usually my mother Patrice would be monitoring the driveway from the kitchen window, ready to rush out and criticize my parking or comment on how tired I looked. Today, the blinds were drawn tight. The house stood silent like a fortress. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the blast of air conditioning. The air inside smelled different. Usually, my mother's house smelled of lemon polish and potpourri. Today, there was a chemical sharpness to the air, underlying a scent of fresh paint and new plastic. "Mom! Dad, we are home!" I called out, dropping Catherine's heavy suitcase in the foyer with a thud. There was no answer. Catherine didn't wait. She kicked off her sneakers, leaving them in a pile by the door, and sprinted down the hallway toward the formal living room. That room was the heart of the house, mostly because it held the custom-built oak bookshelf that spanned the entire north wall. That shelf was Catherine's altar. It was where Nana Rose's legacy lived. I was bending down to straighten Catherine's shoes, purely out of habit, to avoid my mother's criticism when I heard it. It was a scream. But it wasn't a scream of physical pain. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. It was the sound of a child's world fracturing in an instant. "Catherine!" I yelled, my heart hammering against my ribs. I abandoned the shoes and ran. My socks slipped on the polished hardwood floor as I rounded the corner into the living room. I expected to see her hurt. I expected to see blood. I expected to see a broken window. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. Catherine was standing in the center of the Persian rug, her small hands trembling at her sides. She was staring at the north wall. The books were gone. All of them. The massive oak shelves that had groaned under the weight of history for 40 years were stripped bare. The leather-bound spines, the crumbling dust jackets, the delicate papers that Nana Rose had wrapped in silk during the hard times they had vanished. The shelf looked like a skeleton stripped of its flesh. But it wasn't just empty. That would have been confusing. What was terrifying was what had replaced them. Spaced out evenly on the shelves, sitting where Langston Hughes and James Baldwin used to rest, were cheap porcelain dolls. They were hideous things with frilly pink dresses and dead glass eyes. They looked like they had been bought in bulk from a discount store. They sat there, mocking the empty space, staring down at my daughter with vacant expressions. Catherine turned to look at me. Her eyes were wide, swimming with confusion. She looked tiny against the vast emptiness of that wall. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She just pointed a shaking finger at the dolls. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. I turned slowly to the other side of the room. My parents, Desmond and Patrice, were sitting on their new, expansive Italian leather sectional sofa. They were bathed in the cold blue glow of a monstrous television screen. It must have been 85 inches, a sleek black monolith that spanned the entire opposite wall. It was playing an action movie in ultra-high definition, the volume set to a cinematic rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. They didn't even turn around. They sat there sipping iced tea, completely engrossed in the explosion happening on the screen. They looked like strangers. They looked like people I had never met. "Mom?" I choked out, my voice barely working. "Dad?" My father, Desmond, shifted slightly on the couch. He waved a hand dismissively in the air without looking away from the screen. It was a gesture he used when he wanted me to be quiet during the news. "Keep it down, Nia," he grumbled, his voice thick with irritation. "We are trying to calibrate the surround sound. The bass keeps distorting the dialogue." I walked over to the coffee table. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the remote control. I didn't just mute the television. I pressed the power button and held it until the screen went black. The silence that followed was deafening. It was heavy and sharp. "Hey," my mother snapped, finally tearing her eyes away from the blank screen. She looked at me with that familiar mix of annoyance and disappointment, adjusting the silk scarf around her neck. "We were watching that. Do you have any respect for other people's leisure time?" "Where are the books?" I asked. My voice was low, dangerous. It sounded like it belonged to someone else. I pointed a trembling finger at the wall behind me. "Where is Nana Rose's collection?" Catherine moved to my side, gripping the hem of my shirt so tightly her knuckles turned white. She looked at her grandparents, her eyes searching for an explanation, for a joke, for anything that made sense. My father sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of a man burdened by an unreasonable child. He turned on the sofa to face me, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at the blank TV, then at me as if I were the one who had committed a crime. "Oh," that my mother said, waving her manicured hand as if she were swatting away a fly. She picked up a magazine from the table and started fanning herself, looking bored. "We did some cleaning while you were gone." "Cleaning?" I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "You do not clean rare artifacts by removing them, Mother. Those are not old magazines. Those are first editions. Where are they? Did you move them to the attic? Did you box them up for storage?" My mother laughed. It was a short, cold sound that had no humor in it. She looked at the shelf with the porcelain dolls and nodded approvingly. "Storage. Nia, please. We got rid of them." The air left the room. My knees felt weak. "What do you mean you got rid of them?" "We sold them," my father said flatly. He picked up his glass of iced tea and took a long sip. the ice cubes clinking against the glass echoing in the silent room. "You sold them," I whispered. "Yes," my mother chimed in. She stood up and smoothed down her skirt, walking over to the shelf. She reached out and adjusted one of the porcelain dolls, turning it slightly to face the center. And thank goodness we did. Do you know how much dust those old things gathered? It was a health hazard, Nia. I have been sneezing for months. The house felt so cluttered. We needed to modernize. We needed space to breathe. I looked at Catherine. She hadn't said a word. She had let go of my shirt and walked over to the shelf. She reached out and touched the empty wood where her favorite book used to be. Her finger traced the dust line that was still faintly visible. "You sold Catherine's inheritance because of dust?" I asked, my voice rising, cracking with disbelief. "Stop being so dramatic, Nia," my mother said, rolling her eyes. She turned to Catherine with a tight, fake smile. "Catherine, honey, don't look so stricken. Grandma did you a favor. Those books were falling apart. They were dirty. Look at how open the room feels now. Look at the beautiful dolls I bought for you." She gestured grandly to the hideous dolls. "We needed the space," my mother continued, her voice dripping with condescension as she sat back down and reached for the remote I had dropped. "This house was stuck in the past. We decided it was time to move on. Now step aside, you are blocking the screen." I did not move. I did not step aside. Instead, I reached behind me, found the power cord to the surge protector, and yanked it out of the wall. The blue light of the television died instantly, plunging the room into a heavy, suffocating silence. "You want to talk about respect, Mother?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I had never allowed myself to feel before. "Let us talk about respect. Let us talk about theft." My father Desmond slammed his iced tea onto the coffee table liquid, sloshing over the rim. He stood up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "That is enough, Nia," he bellowed. "You come into my house, eat my food, and now you are destroying my property. I should kick you out right now." "Kick me out," I challenged, stepping closer to him. "Go ahead. But before you do, you are going to tell me exactly what happened to those books. You are going to tell me the name of the buyer, the date of the sale, and where the money is." My mother let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She stood up and walked past me toward the dining room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "You want to discuss finances? Fine. Let us sit at the table like civilized people, not like savages screaming in the living room." We moved to the dining room. The table was set with a silk runner and a crystal centerpiece, a perfect display of middle-class elegance. I sat at the head, my parents flanking me on either side. It felt less like a family meeting and more like an interrogation where I was the prisoner. The air conditioning hummed, but the air felt stagnant, trapping us in a bubble of tension. So my father began leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "You want to know about the deal? Fine. I will tell you. It was the deal of a lifetime." He puffed out his chest, a smug smile creeping onto his face. "I called up a dealer, Mr. Sterling. He specializes in African American memorabilia. I told him I had a stack of old books gathering dust. He came over, looked at them with a magnifying glass, and tried to lowball me. He offered $50,000. Can you believe that, $50,000 for a pile of old paper?" He laughed, shaking his head at the memory of his own brilliance. "But I know how to negotiate, Nia. I told him those books were family heirlooms. I told him they had sentimental value. I squeezed him. I made him sweat. And in the end, I got him to quadruple his offer." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with greed. $200,000, Nia? Cash. Wire transfer, actually, but same difference. Your father is a negotiating genius. Who knew that old woman's junk was worth a fortune? $200,000, I repeated, feeling sick. "You sold Nana Rose's legacy, the only thing she left to her great-granddaughter, for the price of a luxury car," my mother scoffed, pouring herself a glass of water from a pitcher on the table. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. Legacy. What legacy?" Those books were just sitting there, rotting, Do you know what we can do with $200,000? Do you know what we have already done? She gestured toward the living room, toward the dark screen of the home theater. We invested in family Nia. Real family. Your sister Bianca is pregnant again. Did you know that? I blinked. I did not know. Of course you didn't, my mother continued, her voice dripping with pity. You are so wrapped up in your own little world. She is having her third baby, a boy this time. She is exhausted. Brad is working double shifts. They need help. They need a place to relax. They need a sanctuary. So you bought them a TV? I asked, my voice flat. We built them a cinema, my father corrected. State of the art. Dolby Atmos sound. Reclining leather seats. A popcorn machine. It is not just for them. It is for the grandkids. It is for the whole family to gather and make memories, unlike those musty books that only you and Catherine cared about. I looked from my father to my mother. Their faces were open, honest. They truly believed they were the heroes of this story. They believed they had taken trash and turned it into treasure. Those books were not trash, I said, my voice shaking. They were first editions from the Harlem Renaissance. Nana Rose scrubbed floors for 50 years to buy them. She wanted Catherine to know where she came from. She wanted her to know that her people were writers, thinkers, poets. That is worth more than a movie theater. That is worth more than money. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal centerpiece rattle. Do not talk to me about ancestors, he shouted. Ancestors do not pay the light bill. Ancestors do not pay for college tuition. Ancestors are dead. Nia, money is real. This house is real. That theater is real. He pointed a finger at my face. You are just jealous. You are jealous because Bianca is successful. You are jealous because she has a husband who provides for her. You are jealous because we are helping her, and not you. You are selfish, Nia. You have always been selfish. You would rather hoard a bunch of old paper than see your sister happy. I felt tears pricking my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I refused to give them the satisfaction. It is not about jealousy, Dad. It is about theft. You stole from a child. We did not steal, my mother shrieked. We are her grandparents. We know what is best for her. And let me tell you something, Miss High and Mighty Archivist. If you try to ruin this for us, if you try to guilt-trip Bianca about her gift, you will be out on the street. Do you hear me? You and your daughter can go live in your car for all I care. I looked at them. Really looked at them. The masks had slipped completely. There was no love here. There was only transaction. There was only status. They had sold my daughter's heritage to buy a glorified toy for their golden child, and they were proud of it. I stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound in the quiet room. I am going to check on Catherine, I said quietly. Go ahead, my father muttered, picking up his glass again. And tell her to be grateful. Tell her she just bought her cousins a happy childhood. I walked out of the dining room, my back stiff. I could feel their eyes boring into me, judging me, dismissing me. They thought the conversation was over. They thought they had won. But as I climbed the stairs to the guest room, I remembered the look on Catherine's face. I remembered her secret smile. My father thought he was a negotiating genius. He thought he had squeezed Mr. Sterling for every penny. But he had forgotten the most important rule of any deal. Make sure the goods are authentic. I opened the bedroom door. Catherine was sitting on the floor, surrounded by her drawings. She looked up at me, her eyes bright and knowing. Did they yell at you, Mommy? She asked. A little bit, baby. She nodded, turning back to her sketchbook. It is okay, she said softly. They can yell all they want. They still don't know about the switch. I sat down on the bed next to her. The weight of what she had done, what we were about to do, settled over me. My parents had chosen money over blood. They had chosen a home theater over history. Fine. If they wanted a show, we would give them one. But the ending wasn't going to be the one they expected. Less than an hour later, I heard the distinct crunch of gravel outside. The sound was heavy and expensive. I walked to the window of the guest room and peered through the blinds. A brand new jet black Range Rover pulled into the driveway right behind my modest sedan. It was massive, shining under the Georgia sun like a dark beetle. It still had the temporary dealer tags in the window. My stomach twisted. I knew exactly who it was, and I knew exactly whose money had likely paid for the down payment. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and looked at Catherine. She was still drawing, calm as a monk in the middle of a hurricane. "Stay here, baby," I told her. "Do not come downstairs unless I call you." She nodded, not even looking up. Form her sketchbook. I walked down the stairs just as the front door swung open without a knock. Brad walked in first. He was a tall white man with a smile that showed too many teeth, and a handshake that always felt like he was trying to sell you a timeshare. He was wearing a polo shirt that was tight enough to show off his gym membership and a gold watch that caught the light with an aggressive glint. He stepped onto the pristine cream-colored rug in the foyer, wearing his muddy loafers. My mother usually screamed if anyone wore shoes in the house. She treated that rug like holy ground. But today, as Brad tracked dirt across the fibers, she did not say a word. She just smiled at him like he was the second coming. "Hey, folks!" Brad boomed, his voice filling the entryway. "Smells like tension in here." He laughed at his own joke, winking at my father, Desmond, who was already pouring him a drink. Behind him, my sister Bianca waddled in. She was 7 months pregnant with her third child, and she wore her exhaustion like a badge of honor. She looked beautiful in a designer maternity dress, but her eyes were hard cold. Flint. "Oh, Nia, you are here," Bianca said, her voice flat. "I thought you might have left by now." Considering the mood, I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my arms crossed. "I'm not going anywhere, Bianca. Especially not when there is grand larceny to discuss." Brad let out a groan, tilting his head back as if asking the heavens for patience. He walked over to me, bypassing my personal space, and clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. I flinched, but stood my ground. "Nia, sweetheart, look at me," he said, his voice dropping to that patronizing tone men use when they think a woman is being hysterical. "I heard you are making a fuss about the library situation. Let us take a breath. Okay? It is the 21st century. We are living in the digital age." He pulled his hand away and gestured vaguely at the air. "Nobody reads physical books anymore. Nia, it is bad for the environment. Think of the trees. All that paper just sitting there rotting. It is inefficient. I mean, come on. You can fit that entire wall on a Kindle the size of a cracker and take it to the beach. Why are you clinging to the past? It is obsolete." I stared at him. My blood boiled, not just because he was wrong, but because of the sheer arrogance of his ignorance. Here was a man who had never had to fight for his history, standing in a house built by black labor, telling me that the recorded voices of my ancestors were inefficient. "It is not about efficiency, Brad," I said, my voice icy. "It is about provenance. It is about the fact that those books were signed by the authors. They were first editions. Do you know what a first edition is? Or do you only read property listings?" Brad chuckled, shaking his head as he took the glass of scotch my father handed him. "Property listings. Pay for this scotch, Nia," he said, taking a sip. "And they certainly pay better than whatever it is you do, filing old papers in a basement somewhere. Look, I get it, you are sentimental. But sentiment does not pay the bills. We did your parents a favor. We cleared out the clutter and we maximized the asset. That is just good business." He turned to my father, raising his glass. "Desmond tells me you guys are loving the new setup. The picture quality is insane." "Right," my father beamed, clinking his glass against Brad's. "Absolutely, Brad. It is like being in the theater but without the sticky floors. Best investment we ever made." I looked at Bianca. She had collapsed onto the sofa, rubbing her lower back. She looked at me with narrowed eyes, expecting me to attack her. "And what about you, Bianca?" I asked, turning my focus to her. "You grew up with those books. You used to read them with me when we were kids. Do you not care that they sold Nana Rose's legacy?" Bianca let out a loud, dramatic sigh. She gestured to her swollen belly. Legacy. Nia. I am growing a legacy right here inside me. I have 2 kids at home and another one on the way. Do you have any idea how much stress I am under? I do not have the luxury of sitting around reading poetry all day. I need help, I need a break. She pointed a manicured finger at the blank TV screen. That room is going to save my sanity. When the kids are screaming and Brad is working late, I can bring them here. They can watch a movie. And I can finally close my eyes for 5 minutes. But of course you would not understand that. You only have one child and she is practically a mute. You do not know what real chaos is. So because you are stressed, my daughter loses her inheritance. Is that the logic? I asked, stepping into the living room. Bianca rolled her eyes. Don't be so dramatic. Catherine does not care about those books. She is 8 years old. She wants to play Roblox, not read Zora Neale Hurston. You are projecting your own boring interests onto her. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded me. They were rewriting reality right in front of my face. They were turning their greed into a necessity, and my defense into selfishness. It does not matter what you think they are worth. I said, my voice low and steady. It matters what the law thinks, and the law calls this theft. The room went quiet. Brad lowered his glass, his smile fading into a look of annoyance. Theft, he repeated. That is a very ugly word. Nia, you might want to be careful before you throw legal terms around, especially since I know a lot more lawyers than you do. I do not care who you know. Brad, you sold property that did not belong to the homeowners. Nana Rose's will was clear. The collection was left to Catherine, not to Desmond, not to Patrice, and certainly not to you. My mother. Patrice slammed her hand down on the coffee table, making the ceramic coasters jump. Enough, she shrieked, her face contorted with fury. I have had enough of this disrespect. This is my house, Nia, my house. Everything under this roof belongs to me. If I want to sell a book, I will sell a book. If I want to burn the furniture, I will burn the furniture. And you do not get to come in here and threaten us with the law. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My hands were shaking, but I unlocked the screen. I am not threatening you. Mother, I am informing you. I am calling the police right now. I am going to report a theft of goods valued over $200,000. That is a felony. Started to dial 911. Brad laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Go ahead, call them, see what happens? My mother stood up and walked right up to me. Her face was inches from mine, and I could smell the wine on her breath. You call the police. Nia, she hissed. And I will tell them you are lying. I will tell them you gave us permission. I will tell them you have been mentally unstable since your divorce. I will tell them you are trying to extort money from us because you are jealous of your sister's success. I froze. My thumb hovered over the call button. You would lie to the police, I whispered. My mother smiled, a cruel, thin smile. I am your mother. Nia. Who do you think they will believe? The upstanding grandparents living in a nice neighborhood, or the single mother who just barged in here screaming? Brad chimed in, leaning against the mantel, looking bored. Besides, it is a civil matter at best. The police won't touch it. They will tell you to get a lawyer, and good luck affording one that can go up against the firm I use. He took another sip of his drink, his eyes cold. Face it, Nia, you have no leverage, you have no proof. And frankly, you are ruining the vibe. We are trying to celebrate the new theater. So put the phone away or get out. I looked at them, the 4 of them, my father, the coward hiding behind his drink, my mother, the manipulator, using her status as a shield, Bianca the martyr, using her children as an excuse, and Brad the architect of this whole disaster, smiling like he had just closed a deal. They were right about one thing. The police probably would not arrest them tonight. It would be a, he said. She said situation, and they would lie. They would lie under oath without blinking, but they were wrong about the leverage. They thought the books were just paper. They thought the transaction was finished. They did not know about the switch. I lowered my phone slowly, slipping it back into my pocket. You are right, I said softly, forcing my face to relax, forcing the anger down into the pit of my stomach. I cannot afford a lawyer. Not right now. My father let out a long breath of relief. See, now was that so hard? We are family. Nia, we should not be fighting over money. I am not fighting, I said, lifting my chin. I am just disappointed. But if this is what you want, if this theater is worth more to you than your relationship with your granddaughter, then fine. Keep it. Bianca clapped her hands together, delighted. Oh, finally. Thank you, Nia. I knew you would come around. Look, let us not be enemies. Bring Catherine over on Saturday. We are having a housewarming party for the theater. Brad is inviting some potential clients. We are going to watch the new superhero movie. It will be fun. I looked at Bianca. She was already moving on, already planning the next event where she could be the center of attention. Sure, I said, a plan forming in my mind, sharp and clear. We will come. We would love to see the theater. Brad raised his glass to me. That is the spirit, Nia. Welcome to the winning team. I turned and walked back toward the stairs. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was racing. They thought I had surrendered. They thought they had bullied me into submission. They had no idea that I had just accepted an invitation to their execution. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard them laughing downstairs. The tension was gone, replaced by the clinking of glasses and the sound of the TV being turned back on. They were celebrating their victory. I walked into the guest room. Catherine looked up from her drawing. Are we leaving? She asked. No, baby, I said, sitting down next to her and smoothing her braids. We are staying for the party. Catherine tilted her head, confused. Why? Because, I whispered, pulling her close. Auntie Bianca and Uncle Brad want to show off their new toy. And I think it is time we showed them exactly what they bought. Catherine smiled, that same secret smile returning to her face. Okay, Mommy, she said. I like parties. I looked at my daughter and I felt a fierce protectiveness surge through me. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated her. And on Saturday, in front of all their friends and clients, they were going to learn that some stories cannot be erased and some debts must be paid in full. That night, the guest room felt smaller than usual. The air conditioning hummed a monotonous rhythm, but it did nothing to cool the fire burning in my chest. I watched Catherine sitting on the floor. She was not crying. She was not throwing a tantrum. She was just drawing. Her marker scratched against the paper with a steady rhythmic sound that was unnervingly calm. Looking at her, I realized she was not just my daughter. She was the mirror image of Nana Rose. To my parents, Nana Rose was just an old woman who smelled like lavender and mothballs. To the world, she was a domestic worker who spent 50 years scrubbing the floors of wealthy white families in Buckhead. But to me, she was a queen in disguise. She was the keeper of the flame. I closed my eyes, and the smell of the guest room faded, replaced by the scent of vanilla and old dust. I was 10 years old again, sitting at Nana Rose's feet in her small shotgun house. The room was dimly lit, but the shelves behind her glowed. Nana Rose did not trust banks. She did not trust the stock market. She trusted words. Specifically, she trusted the words of our people. While my father Desmond was busy trying to climb the corporate ladder, and my mother Patrice was busy buying clothes to fit in at the country club, Nana Rose was quietly building an empire of intellect. She would take the bus to estate sales. She would dig through dusty boxes in the back of antique shops. She knew what to look for. She knew that a first edition of Their Eyes Were Watching God was not just a book. It was a testament to survival. I remember the day she gave the collection to me. It was not in a lawyer's office. It was in her kitchen over a plate of cornbread. My father was there too, pacing around the room, eyeing the books like they were stacks of cash. Desmond had said, Mama, you should sell these. You could fix the roof. You could buy a new car. Why are you hoarding this old paper? Nana Rose had stopped chewing. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked at my father with a gaze that could strip paint off a wall. "They are not for you, Desmond," she had said, her voice low and raspy like sandpaper on velvet. "You see the cover. You see the dollar sign. You do not see the soul." Then she turned to me. She took my small 10-year-old hands in hers. Her palms were rough, calloused from years of labor, but her touch was gentle. "Nia," she whispered, "these books are your freedom. They are the proof that we were here, that we thought, that we dreamed, that we created beauty even when the world told us we were ugly. You keep them safe. You hear me? You keep them safe from the moths, and you keep them safe from the greedy." I had promised her, and for 24 years I had kept that promise. My parents did not understand why I became an archivist. They wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer, something with a title they could brag about at church. But I fell in love with the preservation of history because of those books. When I say the collection was worth $200,000, I am not guessing. I am not looking at eBay listings. I am speaking as a certified appraiser. My parents saw dusty old books. I saw a first edition of The Weary Blues signed by Langston Hughes himself. I saw the ink fading slightly on the title page where he had inscribed it to a friend in 1926. That signature alone was worth more than my parents' car. I saw the rare manuscript of a lesser-known essay by Zora Neale Hurston. It had notes in the margins. Handwritten notes. You could see where she had crossed out a word and replaced it with a better one. You could see the thought process of a genius. That is not just paper. That is holy ground. That is the DNA of African American literature. And there was more. There were letters tucked between the pages. Correspondence between authors discussing the struggle for civil rights long before the movement made headlines. These were not just stories. They were primary source documents. They were evidence of a revolution. To sell them was bad enough. To sell them to a private collector where they would be locked away in a vault, never to be seen by the public again, was a tragedy. But to sell them for a home theater to watch superhero movies was a sacrilege. It was a spitting in the face of every ancestor who had learned to read by candlelight when it was illegal for them to do so. I opened my eyes and looked at the empty spot on the wall where the books should have been in my mind. The pain was physical. It felt like an amputation. My parents had not just sold objects, they had sold my memories. They had sold the sound of Nana Rose's voice reading poetry to me on rainy afternoons. They had sold the smell of the paper that I inhaled every time I needed comfort. But then I looked at Catherine again. She had stopped drawing. She was holding her sketchbook against her chest, staring at the wall. She was 8 years old, but in that moment she looked 80. She had the same set of the jaw as Nana Rose, the same unblinking stare that judged you and found you wanting. She was not crying. Most children would be devastated to lose their favorite things. They would be screaming. They would be begging for their toys back. But Catherine was silent. It was a heavy silence, a silence that filled the room and pressed against the walls. "Mommy," she said without turning her head. "Yes, baby. Nana Rose told me this would happen." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. Nana Rose had died 4 years ago. "What do you mean, baby?" "In my dream," Catherine said calmly. "She came to me in a dream before we went to camp. She told me the wolves were hungry. She told me to hide the treasure." A chill ran down my spine. I was a woman of science. I dealt in facts and carbon dating and paper preservation. I did not believe in ghosts. But looking at my daughter sitting in the center of that hostile house, I felt a presence. I walked over and sat on the floor next to her. I looked at what she had been drawing. It was not a picture of the books. It was a picture of the home theater downstairs. But in her drawing, the screen was cracked. And pouring out of the crack was not light or movie characters. It was ink. Black ink flooding the room, drowning the leather seats, drowning the expensive speakers, drowning my parents and Brad and Bianca. It was dark. It was disturbing. And it was brilliant. I put my arm around her. She leaned into me, but she did not soften. She remained rigid like a soldier in the trenches. "You are a smart girl, Catherine," I whispered into her hair. "You are so much smarter than they are." She looked up at me, and for the first time that night, her mask slipped. I saw the hurt. I saw the betrayal. But underneath it, I saw the steel. "They think they won, Mommy," she said. "They think because they are big and I am small, they can take what is mine. They made a mistake, baby. A big mistake." I looked at the drawing again. The ink looked like a wave. A tidal wave of justice. My parents thought they had sold the past. They thought they had cleared out the clutter to make room for the future. They did not realize that the past is not something you can just sell at a garage sale. The past is a living, breathing thing, and if you disrespect it, it will come back to haunt you. I kissed Catherine's forehead. "Go to sleep now," I said. "We have a big day on Saturday. We have a party to attend." Catherine closed her sketchbook with a definitive snap. It sounded like a judge bringing down a gavel. "Okay, Mommy," she said. "Good night." She crawled into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. She was asleep. I stayed on the floor for a long time watching her. I thought about the books. I thought about the facsimile copies I had bought on eBay years ago to use for display so I could keep the originals in a climate-controlled safe deposit box. I had brought the fakes here to the house to study the binding techniques compared to the originals. Wait. My mind raced back. I had brought the fakes here. But then, I had brought the originals back to cross-reference the marginalia for my thesis. Which ones were on the shelf? I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I had switched them back and forth so many times. But Catherine said she switched them. Catherine said she hid the treasure. If my parents had sold the fakes, then Mr. Sterling the collector was going to be furious. He was a dangerous man in the collector world. He did not take kindly to being scammed. But if Catherine had not switched them, if my parents had actually sold the originals. Number 1. I looked at the sleeping face of my daughter. I trusted her. I trusted the spirit of Nana Rose that lived inside her. My parents wanted a show. They wanted drama. They wanted to display their wealth and their generosity. On Saturday at the housewarming party, they were going to get exactly what they wanted. But the price of admission was going to be higher than they could ever imagine. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the driveway where Brad's Range Rover had been parked. The oil stain it left on the concrete looked like a bruise. "You want to erase us?" I whispered to the empty night. "You want to pretend we do not exist. You want to turn our history into a tax write-off." I touched the glass cold against my fingertips. "Nana Rose spent her life on her knees scrubbing your floors, but I am standing up. And I am not just going to take back the books. I am going to take back our dignity. And I am going to make sure that every time you look at that screen, you see exactly what you lost." I turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness. But I was not afraid of the dark. The dark was where the history lived. The dark was where the ink was. And we were ready to write the final chapter. The next 7 days were a masterclass in gaslighting. My parents did not apologize. They did not try to make amends. Instead, they doubled down on their delusion. The house became a revolving door of contractors and delivery men. I watched from the top of the stairs as massive boxes labeled with high-end electronics brands were hauled into the living room. My father, Desmond, stood in the center of the chaos, directing the workers like a general in a war room. He looked younger. He looked energized. The guilt of selling his granddaughter's inheritance did not weigh on him at all. In fact, it seemed to float him. My mother, Patrice, was even worse. She spent the week on the phone bragging to her friends. I could hear her from the kitchen. "Yes, girl, we finally cleared out that dusty old library. It was such an eyesore. We are putting in a cinema. State of the art. You have to come see it." She spoke about the books as if they were a disease she had cured. She spoke about the theft as if it were a renovation project. Every time she laughed into the receiver, I felt a fresh crack in my heart. But I stayed silent. I kept my head down. I focused on Catherine. Catherine was the eye of the storm. She went to school. She did her homework. She ate her dinner. She was polite to her grandparents, but she never engaged with them. She never smiled at them. It was a cold, professional distance that unsettled them more than any tantrum could have. By Friday afternoon, the installation was complete. The living room had been transformed. The empty shelves were still there, haunting the periphery, but the focus was now the massive screen and the rows of plush leather seats that looked like they belonged in a VIP lounge. On Saturday morning, the humidity in Atlanta was oppressive. The air was thick and heavy, pressing against the windows. I was in the kitchen pouring coffee when my mother breezed in. She was wearing a floral dress that I knew cost more than my monthly car payment. Her hair was freshly done, and she smelled of expensive perfume and entitlement. "Get dressed, Nia," she said without looking at me. "We are leaving in an hour." I did not look up from my coffee. "I am not going anywhere." My mother stopped chopping fruit. She put the knife down with a sharp clatter. "Do not start this again. Today is the official unveiling. Bianca and Brad are hosting a brunch to celebrate the completion of the project. The whole family will be there. The neighbors are coming. You are coming." I turned to face her. "You want me to come celebrate the fact that you stole from my daughter? You want me to drink mimosas and clap while you show off the spoils of your crime? You are delusional." Patrice crossed the room, her heels clicking on the tile. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a hiss. "I want you to stop acting like a victim. We did what was best for this family. We increased the value of this estate. And if you refuse to attend, people will talk. They will ask why Nia is not there. They will think you are jealous of your sister. They will think you are bitter. And I will not have you embarrassing me with your absence." "I am bitter," I said, my voice steady. "And you should be embarrassed." My father walked in, then adjusting his tie. He looked at the standoff and sighed. "Just come, Nia. It is a free meal. Besides, Brad wants to show you the calibration. He thinks you of all people will appreciate the fidelity. Since you like old things so much, maybe you will appreciate watching old movies in high definition." The audacity took my breath away. They were not just cruel, they were oblivious. "I am not going," I repeated. Then Catherine walked into the kitchen. She was wearing her Sunday best, a blue dress with a white collar. Her hair was braided neatly. She looked like an angel, but her eyes were sharp. "Mommy," she said, her voice clear and bright, "I want to go." My parents beamed. My mother clapped her hands together. "See, Nia, even your daughter has more sense than you. She wants to see the movie. She wants to be with her cousins. Don't be the villain who keeps her away from her family." I looked at Catherine. I tried to signal her with my eyes. I tried to tell her that we did not have to do this. We could pack our bags. We could leave. But Catherine gave me a look that stopped me cold. It was a slight tilt of the head, a barely perceptible narrowing of the eyes. It was the look of a predator watching a trap. "Please, Mommy," Catherine said. "I really want to see the new room." I realized then that this was not a request. It was a command. Catherine was ready. She wanted to be there when the hammer dropped. "Fine," I said, turning back to my parents. "We will go. But we are taking my car. And if I hear one word about those books being trash, we are leaving." My father laughed, clapping me on the back. "That is the spirit. You will see, Nia. Once the movie starts, you will forget all about those dusty old papers." I went upstairs to change. I put on a black dress. It was simple, severe. It looked like something you would wear to a funeral or a business merger. I went to my bag and pulled out my work equipment. As an archivist, I document oral histories. I record the stories of people who are often forgotten. I have a digital recorder that is smaller than a pack of gum, but captures audio with crystal clear precision. It is designed to pick up whispers in a quiet room. I check the batteries. Full charge. I slipped the recorder into my clutch purse. My parents thought I was coming to make peace. They thought I was coming to accept my defeat and marvel at their shiny new toy. They did not know that I was coming to collect evidence. In the state of Georgia, only one party needs to consent to a recording. That meant I could record every conversation I was a part of without telling them. I was going to get them on tape. I was going to get them to admit that they sold the books. I was going to get them to admit that they knew the collection belonged to Catherine. And I was going to get Brad to admit that he brokered the deal. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were dark. I am not a victim, I whispered to my reflection. I am the historian, and today I am writing the record. I walked downstairs. Catherine was waiting by the door holding her small purse. She looked up at me and smiled. "Ready, Mommy?" she asked. "Ready, baby." We walked out to the car. My parents were already in their luxury sedan backing out of the driveway. I followed them. The drive to Bianca and Brad's house was short, but it felt like miles. We drove past manicured lawns and gated communities. This was a world of appearances. A world where net worth was more important than self-worth. We pulled up to Bianca's house. It was a McMansion, a sprawling structure with too many columns and not enough character. The driveway was already full of cars. Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas. The whole social circle was here. My stomach churned. This was going to be a public execution. I just had to make sure I wasn't the one being executed. I reached into my purse and flipped the switch on the recorder. A tiny red light blinked once, then went dark, indicating it was recording. "Let us go," I said to Catherine. We walked up the path to the front door. I could hear laughter coming from inside. I could hear the clinking of glasses. I could smell expensive catering. My sister Bianca opened the door. She was glowing. She held a champagne flute in one hand and rubbed her belly with the other. "Nia," she squealed, pulling me into a fake hug. "You made it. I was so worried you were going to be a sourpuss and stay home." She looked down at Catherine. "And look at you, sweetie. You look adorable. Go on in, the cousins are in the game room." Catherine did not move. She stayed glued to my side. "I want to see the theater," Auntie Bianca, Catherine said. "Grandma said it is magic." Bianca laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "It is magic, sweetie. It is absolute magic. Come on, everyone is in the living room. We are about to start the demo." We followed her into the house. The interior was just like the exterior. Expensive, cold, beige. The living room was packed. My parents were holding court in the center of the room, surrounded by neighbors. My father was gesturing wildly, telling the story of the renovation. We just decided it was time. He was saying loud enough for the recorder in my purse to catch every word. "We had this old library, just taking up space." And Brad said, "Desmond, think of the equity. Think of the enjoyment." And I said, "You are right. Out with the old, in with the new." The neighbors nodded politely, sipping their drinks. "And the cost must have been astronomical," one neighbor asked. My mother giggled. "Well, quality comes at a price. But let us just say we found some hidden assets in the attic that helped cover the bill." Hidden assets. That is what she called my daughter's inheritance. I tightened my grip on my purse. The recorder was running. Every word was a nail in their coffin. Brad spotted me from across the room. He raised a glass, his face flushed with alcohol and triumph. "Nia," he shouted, drawing the room's attention to me. "The skeptic has arrived. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my sister-in-law. She thinks we should have kept the dusty books. Can you believe it?" The room chuckled, a ripple of amusement at my expense. I forced a smile. It was thin and sharp like a paper cut. "I am just here to see the investment, Brad," I said, my voice projecting clearly. "I want to see exactly what $200,000 looks like." Brad grinned, oblivious to the trap. "Well, step right up," he said, gesturing to the double doors that led to the new theater room. Prepared to be amazed. I looked down at Catherine. She squeezed my hand. "Here we go, Mommy," she whispered. We stepped forward into the lion's den. But the lions didn't know that we had brought a match, and the whole room was soaked in gasoline. The interior of Bianca and Brad's house was an assault on the senses. If my parents' home was a shrine to old money aspirations, this house was a temple to new money desperation. Everything was shiny, everything was oversized, and everything screamed, "Look at me." We stepped into the foyer, which opened up into a massive great room with cathedral ceilings that were high enough to have their own weather system. The floors were marble cold and slippery, echoing the sound of 50 pairs of expensive shoes. A chandelier the size of a small car hung overhead, dripping with crystals that caught the light and shattered it into 1,000 blinding fragments. It was impressive in the way a casino is impressive. It was designed to overwhelm you, to make you feel small and poor, so that you would be grateful just to be allowed inside. The air smelled of expensive catering, mini crab cakes, truffle oil, champagne, and beneath it all the sharp metallic tang of heavy cologne and perfume. I held Catherine's hand tightly. Her palm was warm and dry. She was looking around with wide eyes, but not with wonder. She was looking at the gold leaf on the crown molding and the velvet drapes that pooled on the floor like melted butter. She was dissecting it. "Nia," someone shouted over the din of conversation. I turned to see a woman I barely recognized. It was one of Bianca's friends from her Pilates class. She was wearing a cocktail dress that cost more than my first car and holding a glass of white wine with a manicured hand. "We are so glad you could make it," she gushed, leaning in close. "Bianca told us you were having a hard time with the transition. You know, letting go of the old stuff. It is so brave of you to come and support her." I smiled. It was the same smile I used when I found a document that had been destroyed by water damage. A smile of professional detachment. "I would not miss it for the world," I said. "I am very interested in transitions." The woman blinked, not understanding the subtext, and drifted away to find someone more important. Brad was in the center of the room, acting as the ringmaster of this circus. He had a microphone, an actual microphone. He was holding it like a rock star, his voice booming through hidden speakers that were probably part of the new system he was so proud of. "All right, everyone," Brad shouted, tapping the mic. "If I could get your attention, please. We are about to begin the grand tour." The crowd hushed. 50 heads turned toward him. My parents, Desmond and Patrice, were standing near the fireplace. My father was holding a glass of scotch, looking at Brad with a mixture of pride and envy. My mother was beaming, basking in the reflected glory of her son-in-law. Brad gestured toward the double doors at the far end of the room. They were made of dark mahogany with frosted glass panels. They looked like the entrance to a boardroom or a crypt. As many of you know, Brad began, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Bianca and I have been dreaming of this day for a long time. We wanted to create a space where family could come together, a space where we could escape the pressures of the modern world and immerse ourselves in art." Art. He called Marvel movies art. I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "But quality costs money." Brad continued, walking slowly toward the doors. "And we had to make some tough decisions to make this happen. We had to clear out the dead weight. We had to liquidate some assets that were just gathering dust." He paused for effect. The crowd leaned in. They loved a story about sacrifice, especially when the sacrifice resulted in a 200-inch screen. "And I have to give credit where credit is due," Brad said, scanning the crowd until his eyes locked on me. My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. I felt the recorder in my purse humming against my hip, a silent witness to what was about to happen. Brad pointed at me. A spotlight from the ceiling track actually swiveled to illuminate me. I blinked in the sudden glare. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to my sister-in-law, Nia." The crowd applauded politely. Catherine squeezed my hand so hard her fingernails dug into my palm. "Nia is a historian," Brad said, his tone dripping with mock respect. "She loves old things. She loves dusty papers and crumbling books. And she was very attached to the collection we sold to fund this project." The room went quiet. The applause died down. This was the humiliation ritual. This was the part where he stripped me naked in front of the tribe to show everyone that I was powerless. But Brad said, flashing his $1,000,000 smile, "Nia is also a generous soul, even though she kicked and screamed a little bit." Laughter. A ripple of chuckles went through the room. Even though she dragged her feet, Brad continued, "She is here today. She is the main sponsor of this home theater. Without her collection of, what was it again, Nia? Old poetry. Harlem Renaissance First Editions." I said clearly, my voice cutting through the room without a microphone. "Right?" Brad laughed dismissively. "Without her donation of those old books, none of this would be possible. So let us give a round of applause to the involuntary donor of the year." The room erupted. They laughed. They clapped. They looked at me with pity and amusement. To them, I was the bitter sister who had been outsmarted. I was the loser who had been forced to pay for the winner's trophy. My mother laughed the loudest. She raised her glass to me, mouthing the words, "Lighten up." I did not look away. I did not blush. I stared straight at Brad. I etched his face into my memory. The sweat on his upper lip, the way his suit jacket pulled slightly at the buttons, the absolute unshakable confidence of a mediocre man who has never faced a consequence in his life. "Thank you, Brad," I said. "It is always a pleasure to see how you spend other people's money." The laughter faltered for a second. A few people looked uncomfortable, but Brad just rolled right over it. "Funny. She is funny too." "All right, enough talk. Who wants to see the beast?" He threw open the double doors. A collective gasp went through the room. I have to admit, visually, it was impressive. The room was cavernous. The walls were lined with acoustic panels covered in black velvet. The floor was tiered, rising in 3 rows of stadium seating. And the seats were not just chairs. They were massive reclining leather thrones with cup holders and built-in massage functions. And the screen. It was not a television. It was a wall. A seamless floor-to-ceiling LED display that was currently showing a looping video of a tropical reef in such high definition that it looked like you could reach out and touch the fish. "Welcome to the Thunderdome," Brad shouted, ushering people inside. The crowd surged forward. They oohed and awed, running their hands over the leather, tapping the acoustic panels. They were like children in a candy store, dazzled by the shiny new toy. I walked in last, dragging Catherine with me. The air inside the room was cool and smelled of new electronics and leather conditioner. It was a sterile, artificial smell. My parents had already claimed the best seats in the house, 2 prime spots in the center of the middle row. They were reclining, their feet up, holding glasses of champagne. My father saw me and waved me over. "Nia, come sit down. There is a seat in the back for you and the kid." I walked over to them. They looked ridiculous. 2 grown adults sitting in the dark, worshipping a screen. "Well," my mother asked, looking up at me, "is it not magnificent?" "It is certainly expensive," I said. My father patted the armrest of his chair. "This leather is imported from Italy, Nia. And the sound system, Dolby Atmos. 11 speakers, 2 subwoofers. You can feel the sound in your chest. Brad says it has more processing power than a NASA computer." He looked at me with a pitying expression. "You have to admit, Nia, this is better than a shelf of rotting books. This is an experience. This brings the family together. Look at everyone. Look how happy they are." I looked around. People were laughing, drinking, taking selfies with the screen. They were happy. But it was a shallow happiness. It was the happiness of consumption. "And what happens when the power goes out?" "Dad," I asked quietly, "what happens when the screen breaks? What do you have left?" My father frowned, annoyed that I was ruining his moment. Always the pessimist. He grumbled, "Just sit down, Nia. Grab a drink. Try to enjoy yourself for once in your life." I took a deep breath. I reached into my purse and checked the recorder again. It was still running. "I want to hear it," I whispered to myself. "I need to hear them say it one more time." I leaned in closer to my mother. So, Brad really handled the sale of the books himself? I asked, keeping my voice casual. I'm just curious. I did not think he knew anything about rare books. My mother snorted, taking a sip of her champagne. He didn't need to know about books, Nia. He knows about business. He found a buyer online, some guy named Sterling. Brad told him the collection was gathering dust and he wanted a quick sale. The guy wired the money the next day, 200,000. She shook her head, amazed. Easy money, and to think you were just letting it sit there. And you signed the papers, I asked. Since the will was in Catherine's name, my mother waved her hand. We are her guardians, essentially. Besides, Brad handled the paperwork. He signed as the agent of the estate. It was all very standard. Brad signed as the agent. That was it. That was the confession. Fraud, forgery, theft. I felt a rush of adrenaline so strong it made my hands tremble. I had it. I had everything I needed to send them to jail. But I wasn't going to send them to jail yet. Not until the movie started. Not until the trap was sprung. I squeezed Catherine's hand. Let us go find a seat, baby, I said. We walked to the back row, away from the prime seats, away from the center of attention. I sat down in one of the leather chairs. It was comfortable, I had to admit. It swallowed me whole. Catherine sat next to me. She looked small in the massive chair. Her feet didn't even touch the ground. She looked at the screen where the tropical fish were swimming in an endless loop. Are they going to play the movie soon? She asked. Yes, I said. Uncle Brad is just getting ready. Down in the front, Brad was fiddling with a control panel on the wall. The lights dimmed. The crowd cheered. Okay, everyone, Brad shouted. Grab your popcorn. We are about to christen this bad boy. We are going to watch the latest superhero blockbuster in 4K resolution. Prepare to have your minds blown. The screen went black. The room plunged into darkness. The only light came from the exit signs and the faint glow of the floor track lighting. The sound of a heavy bass thrummed through the room, shaking the floor. The movie studio logo appeared on the screen, bright and crisp. I sat back in the dark. I watched the back of my parents' heads. I watched Brad standing proudly by the control panel. They were so confident. They were so secure in their victory. They thought they had erased my history to build their future. But they had forgotten one thing. History has a way of repeating itself. And tragedy is always waiting in the wings. I looked at Catherine. In the flickering light of the screen, I saw her reach into her small purse. She pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She held it in her hand like a talisman. The movie was starting. But the real show was just about to begin. And unlike the fiction on the screen, this ending was going to be very, very real. The room plunged into a chaotic symphony of explosions. The sound system was not just loud, it was violent. The floorboards vibrated with such intensity that I could feel the bass rattling my teeth. On the screen, a masked hero was throwing a car at a villain, the metal crunching with a hyper-realistic screech that made several guests cover their ears. My father, Desmond, was in ecstasy. He turned to the neighbor sitting next to him, shouting over the noise. Can you feel that? That is the subwoofer? It is like being inside the engine of a jet. The neighbor nodded, looking slightly terrified but polite enough to give a thumbs up. I sat in the back row, my body tense. The sensory overload was designed to numb you, to make you forget everything except the flashing lights and the booming sound. It was a perfect metaphor for my family. Loud, expensive, and completely devoid of substance. My mother Patrice was reclined all the way back, a glass of champagne balanced precariously on her stomach. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom, utterly satisfied with her decision to trade history for high-fidelity noise. 10 minutes into the movie, just as the hero was about to deliver a monologue about responsibility, the screen froze. The room went silent, save for the hum of the projector. Brad's voice boomed from the front of the room. Sorry, folks, just wanted to pause for a second to refill the drinks and to let the lady of the hour say a few words. The lights came up to a dim amber glow. Bianca stood up from her seat in the front row. She looked radiant in the artificial light, her pregnancy glow enhanced by the sheer adoration of the room. She held up her champagne flute, which was filled with sparkling apple cider, and turned to face the crowd. "I just wanted to say thank you," she began, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "Thank you to everyone for coming to share this special moment with us." She looked at my parents. "And a huge thank you to Mom and Dad. You guys are the best grandparents in the world, seriously." Most parents hold on to things forever. They let their houses get cluttered with junk from the past. But you guys, you saw the vision. She swept her arm toward the frozen screen. You guys made the hard choice. You decided to invest in the future. You decided to invest in us. My mother wiped a tear from her eye. My father puffed out his chest. "And I have to be honest." Bianca continued, her eyes flickering toward me in the back row. A nasty little smile played on her lips. "It feels so good to finally be rid of that old library. I mean, let's be real. It was just a pile of paper trash." The guests chuckled nervously. I felt my grip tighten on the armrest. The recorder in my purse was still running. "No, really." Bianca laughed, gaining confidence. "Who reads dusty old books anymore? It is so depressing. Books are for lonely people. They are for nerds who do not have a social life. But this," she gestured to the room, to the leather seats, to the surround sound speakers. "This is class. This is what success looks like. This is how a real family spends time together. We do not sit in silence reading. We experience things. Together." "Hear, hear," Brad shouted, raising his glass. To the future and to the trash heap of history, the room erupted in applause. My parents clinked their glasses. Bianca blew kisses to the crowd. I felt a cold rage settling in my bones. It was a calm, deadly feeling. They had not just sold the books, they were dancing on the ashes. They were mocking the very thing that had given them the freedom to stand there in their designer clothes. I looked at Catherine. She was sitting perfectly still. The blue light from the exit sign illuminated her face. She was not looking at Bianca. She was not looking at the screen. She was looking at her hands folded neatly in her lap. Then she moved. It was a slow, deliberate movement. She unbuckled her seatbelt. She slid out of the oversized leather chair. Her feet hit the carpet with a soft thud. "Catherine," I whispered. She did not answer. She began to walk down the aisle. The room was still buzzing with conversation as people refilled their drinks and chattered about the picture quality. No one noticed the small 8-year-old girl walking toward the front of the room. She looked tiny against the scale of the theater. A small figure in a blue dress, moving through the Valley of Giants. She reached the front of the room right below the massive screen where the frozen image of the superhero loomed over her. She stood there for a moment looking at the audience. Brad was the first to notice her. He was busy pouring more champagne for a neighbor when he saw her standing there. "Well, look who it is," he boomed, putting on his best favorite uncle voice. "Little Miss Catherine. Do you want to say something? Do you want to thank your grandparents for the movie?" The room went quiet. Everyone looked at the little girl. My parents smiled encouragingly. Bianca looked annoyed that the spotlight had shifted. Catherine did not smile. She did not fidget. She stood with her back straight, her chin lifted high. She looked exactly like Nana Rose. "Uncle Brad," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. It carried through the acoustic-treated room with a bell-like clarity. "Yes, sweetie," Brad asked, leaning against the wall, looking amused. "Do you know what provenance is?" The question hung in the air. It was a strange, heavy word for an 8-year-old to use. It sounded out of place in this room of plastic and leather. Brad blinked. He looked at the guests, then back at Catherine. He let out a loud, barking laugh. "Provenance," he repeated, dragging out the syllables. "What is that, kid? Is it a new flavor of ice cream? Or maybe the name of a Pokémon?" The crowd laughed. It was a relieved laughter. They thought it was a joke. They thought the cute kid was saying big words she did not understand. My father called out from the second row, It means she wants some ice cream, Brad. Get the girl a scoop. Catherine did not laugh. She did not even blink. She waited for the laughter to die down. She waited until the silence became uncomfortable again. No, she said. Provenance is the history of ownership. It is how you prove something is real. Brad's smile faltered slightly. He stood up straighter, looking a bit confused. Okay, Professor, he said, his voice a little tighter. Thanks for the vocabulary lesson. Now go sit down so we can start the movie. Catherine did not move. She took a step closer to him. Mommy says provenance is everything, she continued, her eyes locking onto his. She says, if you do not have provenance, you do not know what you are buying. You might be buying a fake. The room got very quiet. The air conditioning hummed. The ice in the glasses clinked softly. My mother sat up in her chair. Catherine, honey, that is enough, she said sharply. Go sit with your mother. But Catherine ignored her. She kept her eyes on Brad. You sold the books to Mr. Sterling, right? She asked. Brad looked around the room, his face reddening. We already talked about this, Catherine. Yes, we sold them. Now go sit down. Did you check the provenance, Uncle Brad? She asked. Brad rolled his eyes. He looked at the crowd, trying to play it off. Kids, right? They latch onto a word and just won't let go. Yes, Catherine. I checked everything. Mr. Sterling is a professional. Now seriously, Scoot. Catherine reached into her small purse. The sound of the zipper opening was loud in the silent room. Because Nana Rose told me about provenance too, she said. She told me that sometimes people only look at the cover. They do not look inside. She pulled out a piece of paper. It was not the drawing she had shown me before. It was a receipt. A receipt from a copy shop. Brad frowned. What is that? Catherine smiled. It was the smile I had seen in the bedroom. A smile that was too old, too wise, and terrifyingly calm. It is a receipt, she said. For the photocopies. Photocopies? Brad asked, his brow furrowing. What are you talking about? Catherine turned to face the audience. She held the paper up. Mommy bought a practice set of books on eBay, she said to the room. They are called facsimiles. That means they are copies. They look real on the outside. But inside the paper is new. She turned back to Brad. I switched them, Uncle Brad. Brad froze. His glass of champagne tilted in his hand, threatening to spill. What he whispered. I switched them. Catherine repeated, her voice cheerful. 3 months ago, I put the real books in the Lego boxes under my bed, and I put the copybooks on the shelf. She tilted her head, looking at him with innocent curiosity. So when you sold the collection to Mr. Sterling for $200,000, you sold him the copies. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. No one breathed, no one moved. You sold him the fakes, Catherine said, delivering the final blow. And since you signed the paper saying they were real, isn't that called fraud? Brad's face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. The glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, splashing champagne onto his expensive Italian leather shoes, but he didn't even notice. He stared at the little girl in the blue dress. And for the first time in his life, Brad looked terrified. I sat in the back row and I felt a smile spread across my face. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a historian watching an empire crumble. The movie on the screen was frozen on the hero's face. But the real action was happening right here on the floor. And my daughter was the star. The heavy mahogany door of Bianca's mansion clicked shut behind us, sealing away the noise of the party and the smell of expensive perfume. The humid Georgia night air hit me like a physical weight, but it felt cleaner than the air inside. I did not look back. I gripped Catherine's hand so tight I was afraid I might be hurting her, but she did not pull away. She walked beside me with a bounce in her step, her head held high like a miniature queen who had just ordered an execution. We walked to the car in silence. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched the chaos in my mind. I unlocked the sedan and we climbed inside. The interior was dark and quiet, a sanctuary of normalcy after the madness we had just escaped. I started the engine, but I did not put the car in gear. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. The only light came from the street lamps casting long, rhythmic shadows across the dashboard as cars drove past on the main road. "Catherine," I said, my voice trembling. I turned to look at her in the passenger seat. The orange glow of a streetlight sliced across her face, illuminating her calm, unblinking eyes. She was buckling her seatbelt with methodical precision. "Yes, Mommy?" she asked. "Did you tell the truth in there?" Catherine looked at me. She did not hesitate. She did not look down. "Yes." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It came out as a shuddering gasp. I leaned my head back against the headrest, staring at the dark fabric of the car roof. My mind was reeling, trying to piece together the timeline, trying to understand how my 8-year-old daughter had outsmarted 4 grown adults. "Tell me," I said, softly. "Tell me exactly what you did." Catherine smoothed her dress over her knees. She looked out the window at the sprawling lawn of her aunt's house. "I saw them looking." "Mommy?" She began, her voice quiet and steady. "Before we went to camp, I saw Grandma Patrice looking at the books. She was holding a calculator, and I heard Uncle Brad talking to Grandpa. He said the market was hot. He said paper was dead." She turned back to me. "I knew they were going to sell them. Nana Rose told me in the dream, but I also saw it in their eyes. They looked at the books the way a wolf looks at a rabbit." I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. "So what did you do, baby? Remember the practice books?" she asked. "The ones you bought on the internet? The facsimiles?" I nodded. Of course I remembered. I had bought a set of high-quality reproductions 3 years ago. They were used for teaching and display. They looked identical to the originals on the outside, down to the cover art and the aging of the spine. But inside, they were printed on modern acid-free paper, and the copyright page clearly stated they were reproductions printed in 2010. "I kept them in the study," I said. "On the bottom shelf." Catherine nodded. "I moved them, one by one. Every day after school, when Grandma was watching her soap operas, I would take a real book from the living room and hide it in my room. Then I would take a fake book from the study and put it in the living room." She giggled, a soft, innocent sound that chilled me to the bone. "It took me 2 weeks. Grandma never noticed. She dusted right around them. She never opened them. Not once." "And the real books?" I asked. "Where are they, Catherine?" She smiled, that secret smile again. "Under my bed, in the big plastic bins. The ones labeled Lego and winter clothes. I put the books at the bottom, wrapped in my old t-shirts. Then I poured the Legos on top." I closed my eyes, imagining the scene. My parents walking past those bins every day. Brad probably kicking one of them aside when he came to measure the room for the theater. The treasure had been right under their noses, protected by a layer of plastic bricks, and the arrogance of adults who never bother to look closely at a child's world. "You saved them," I whispered. "You actually saved them." Catherine shrugged, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Nana Rose said to keep them safe. So I did." I looked at my daughter and I felt a surge of pride so intense it almost hurt. She was brilliant. She was resourceful. She was a true guardian of history. But then the reality of the situation crashed down on me. The legal reality. I sat up straight, my hands tightening on the wheel. "Catherine, listen to me. This is very important. You said Uncle Brad sold the books to Mr. Sterling." "Yes. And he sold the ones that were on the shelf. The copies." "Yes. And Mr. Sterling paid $200,000. "Yes. Grandma said it was a wire transfer." My mind started to race, processing the implications at lightning speed. I was an archivist, but I worked closely with estate lawyers. I knew the statutes. I knew the definitions. My parents and Brad had not just committed a crime against me, they had committed a crime against the buyer. And because of the amount of money involved, it wasn't a small crime. It was a catastrophe. "Oh my God," I whispered. "What is it?" Mommy Catherine asked, tilting her head. I looked at her, trying to explain the gravity of what she had just done without scaring her. "Baby, do you know what fraud is?" Catherine shook her head. "No. Fraud is when you sell something to someone and you tell them it is one thing, but it is actually something else. Something worth much less." "Like selling a rock and saying it is a diamond?" Catherine asked. "Exactly. And because Uncle Brad sold those copies claiming they were the original first editions, he committed fraud." I stared out the windshield at the dark street. If Mr. Sterling paid $200,000 for a set of facsimiles that are worth maybe $500 at best, that is grand larceny. It is theft by deception, and because they used a wire transfer to move the money, it is wire fraud. That is a federal crime, Catherine. That is the FBI. I let out a short, hysterical laugh. "And Uncle Brad? You said he signed the papers." Catherine nodded. "He bragged about it. He said he was the agent. He signed the certificate of authenticity. I saw him practicing his signature on a napkin." I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. The irony was suffocating. Brad, the man who prided himself on his business acumen. Brad, the man who called my history trash. He had just signed his name to a felony. He had certified the authenticity of a fake. He did not check the provenance, I muttered to myself. He did not open the books. He was so greedy, so desperate to get the money for his stupid theater, that he didn't even look at what he was selling. I turned the key, fully igniting the engine. The dashboard lit up, casting a blue glow over us. Mommy Catherine said softly, "Are they going to jail?" I looked at her. I looked at the innocent genius who had just toppled a house of cards with a box of Legos. "I don't know, baby," I said, putting the car in gear. "But they are definitely going to wish they had read a book instead of watching a movie." I pulled away from the curb, leaving the mansion and the party behind. In the rearview mirror, I could see the lights of the house blazing in the darkness. Inside, I knew chaos was erupting. Brad was probably frantically checking the receipt Catherine had thrown at him. My parents were probably screaming. But here in the car, it was quiet. We drove through the night, the streetlights flickering over us like a strobe light. Every flash illuminated Catherine's face, calm and serene. She wasn't afraid. She had done her job. Now it was my turn. I was not going to turn around. I was not going to go back and help them fix this. They had made their bed. Now they had to lie in it. And the mattress was stuffed with fake books and federal indictments. I reached over and turned on the radio. A jazz song was playing, something slow and mournful. It sounded like the Harlem Renaissance. It sounded like victory. "We are going to go get the books," I said, my voice firm. "We are going to go to Grandma's house right now, while they are all still at the party. We are going to get the Lego bins, and then we are going to leave." Catherine smiled. "Can we get ice cream after?" I laughed, a genuine sound of release. "Yes, baby, we can get all the ice cream you want." As I drove, the weight of the situation settled on me, not as a burden, but as a weapon. For years, my family had treated me like I was powerless. They treated me like a spectator in my own life. But tonight, the roles had reversed. They were the ones in the dark watching a screen while their real lives burned down around them. And I was the one holding the remote control. Brad had called me the involuntary donor. He had no idea. I wasn't the donor. I was the witness for the prosecution. And the trial had just begun. The drive to my grandmother's old house was a blur of streetlights and adrenaline. Catherine fell asleep in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window, clutching the Lego instruction manual like a shield. I glanced at her, then back at the road. My mind was no longer racing with panic. It had settled into a cold, hard rhythm. It was the rhythm of a predator who realizes the prey has already walked into the trap. I am an archivist. My job is not just about dusting old paper. It is about authentication. It is about provenance. It is about law. I deal with estate transfers, copyright infringements, and the grim reality of what happens when artifacts are stolen. I know the statutes better than most lawyers. As I drove, I ran the checklist in my head. My parents and Brad had sold a collection they did not own. That was theft. They had represented facsimiles as originals to inflate the price. That was fraud. They had used a wire transfer to accept the $200,000 across state lines. That was wire fraud. And because the amount exceeded $100,000, it was not just a crime. It was a serious felony. It was the kind of crime that carries mandatory minimum sentences. But as I turned onto the quiet street where I was currently staying a rental apartment, I had secured while my house was being renovated, a dangerous thought occurred to me. If I called them right now, if I screamed at them, if I told them that Catherine had switched the books, what would they do? They would panic. They would scramble. They would call Mr. Sterling immediately. They would apologize profusely. They would claim it was an honest mistake. They would wire the money back before he even realized what he had bought. They would lose the home theater, yes. They would be embarrassed, yes. But they would stay out of prison. They would spin the narrative. They would tell the family that Nia almost ruined everything with her drama, but they fixed it. They would survive. I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. The silence of the night wrapped around us. I looked at Catherine sleeping peacefully. I thought about the way Brad had laughed at her. I thought about my mother calling my heritage trash. I thought about the way they had erased me from my own family. They did not deserve to survive this. They needed to learn a lesson that money could not fix. And the only way to make the crime irreversible was to let them spend the money. In the eyes of the law, intent is everything. If they returned the money immediately, it looked like an error. But if they spent it, if they went on a shopping spree, if they burned through that cash on luxuries, that proved mens rea. That proved a guilty mind. That proved they had no intention of ever making things right. I decided then and there, I would not say a word. I would not warn them. I would let them dig their own grave dollar by dollar. I woke Catherine gently and carried her inside. We retrieved the bins from the trunk. The real books were there, safe and sound, smelling of history and victory. I tucked Catherine into bed and then I sat on the couch in the dark. I picked up my phone. I opened Instagram. The show was about to begin. For the next 2 weeks, I became a silent observer of my family's financial suicide. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, except the passengers were laughing and drinking champagne while the cliff edge rushed toward them. Day 1. Bianca posted a photo of a new Louis Vuitton luggage set. The caption read, "Packing for paradise, we deserve this." I zoomed in on the photo. 3 suitcases. That was easily $10,000. Day 3. A video from the airport. They were flying first class. Not just my parents, but Brad, Bianca, and their 2 kids. 7 tickets to Cabo San Lucas. I did the math in my head. Another $15,000 gone. They were burning through the money at a terrifying rate. They felt rich. They felt untouchable. They thought the $200,000 was a windfall that would never end. They did not understand taxes. They did not understand that they had sold a stolen asset. They just saw zeros in a bank account and lost their minds. I sat in my living room drinking tea, scrolling through their feed. Day 5. A photo from a 5-star resort in Cabo. An infinity pool overlooking the ocean. My mother was wearing a new swimsuit and a wide-brimmed hat holding a cocktail. My father was smoking a cigar that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. "Living our best life," the caption said. "Hard work pays off." I laughed out loud in the empty room. Hard work. They called theft hard work. Brad posted a picture of a dinner bill. Steak and lobster for everyone. Vintage wine. The total at the bottom was over $2,000. He tagged it *boss life #real estate mogul*. I took screenshots. I saved every single image. I created a folder on my laptop named Evidence. Every time they spent a dime, they were adding another link to the chain that would eventually drag them down. It was fascinating to watch. It was also infuriating. They were spending my daughter's college fund on overpriced seafood and designer sunglasses. A part of me wanted to scream. A part of me wanted to fly down there and shake them. But I forced myself to wait. Patience is a weapon. By the second week, the spending had accelerated. They were not just buying experiences, they were buying things. Bianca posted a photo of a new diamond tennis bracelet. Push present from hubby, she wrote. Baby number 3 is going to be spoiled. Push present, paid for by her niece's inheritance. The cruelty was breathtaking. They knew I saw these posts. They knew I was struggling to pay for my renovation. They knew I was hurt, and they were rubbing it in my face. They were practically daring me to say something, so I did. I knew that for the trap to work perfectly, they needed to feel completely secure. They needed to believe that I had given up. They needed to believe that the involuntary donor had finally accepted her place. I opened a text message to my mother. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I had to make this sound convincing. I had to swallow my pride and type the words that would seal their fate. "Hi, Mom," I typed. "I saw the photos from Cabo. It looks beautiful." I paused. I needed to sound defeated. "I have been thinking a lot about what happened. About the books. I was angry at first, but maybe you were right. Maybe I was holding on to the past too tightly. The theater is impressive, and seeing you all so happy, that is what matters. I just want peace. I hope you are enjoying the trip." I read it over. It made me want to vomit. It was the perfect lie. I hit send. The response was almost immediate. They must have been sitting by the pool glued to their phones. "Oh, Nia," my mother replied. "I am so glad you finally came to your senses. We knew you would understand eventually. It takes a big person to admit when they are wrong. We are doing this for the family. We will bring you back a souvenir." Asterisk. A souvenir. They sell my legacy and offer me a keychain. Then a text from Bianca. "Thanks for not being a drama queen anymore. It is really stressing Mom out. We are looking at vacation homes down here. Might invest some of the surplus. Brad says real estate is booming in Mexico." I stared at the screen. Vacation homes. They were planning to buy property with the money. If they put a down payment on a house, the money would be tied up. It would be gone. When Mr. Sterling came calling, they would be liquid. They would be insolvent. This was perfect. "Go ahead," I whispered to the phone. "Buy the house, buy the boat, buy the whole damn resort." I put the phone down and walked into the kitchen. Catherine was sitting at the table eating cereal. She looked up at me. "Are they still spending it, Mommy?" she asked. "Yes, baby, they are spending it all." Catherine crunched on a spoonful of cereal. "Good," she said simply. I looked at my daughter. She understood the strategy instinctively. She understood that sometimes you have to let the enemy advance so you can flank them. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day I checked my email, expecting a frantic message from my parents saying that Mr. Sterling had contacted them. But the days stretched into 2 weeks. Mr. Sterling must have been busy, or maybe he was savoring the collection, taking his time to catalog his new acquisition. I imagined him in his study, putting on white gloves, preparing to examine the rare first edition of Their Eyes Were Watching God. I imagined the moment he opened the cover. I imagined the moment he touched the paper. He was a professional. He would know instantly. The texture would be wrong. The smell would be wrong. And when he looked at the copyright page, it was a ticking time bomb, and my family was dancing on top of it. 2 days later, they returned from Cabo. They came back tanned, relaxed, and loaded down with duty-free bags. They posted a group photo in the driveway of my parents' house, standing in front of the Range Rover. "Back to reality," the caption said, but feeling refreshed and blessed. I zoomed in on Brad's face. He looked smug. He looked like a man who had gotten away with the perfect crime. I closed my laptop. The vacation was over. The spending spree was done. The money was effectively gone, transformed into memories, depreciating assets in a tan that would fade in a week. They had crossed the point of no return. I stood up and walked to the window. The sky outside was gray, a storm brewing over Atlanta. It matched my mood perfectly. The silence from my end was over. The silence from Mr. Sterling was about to break. I checked my phone one last time. No messages. Just the lingering echo of my mother's condescending text. "Glad you came to your senses." I smiled, a cold, dangerous smile that did not reach my eyes. "I have come to my senses, Mother. I have realized exactly who you are, and now I am going to let the world see it too." The phone rang. It was not my mother. It was not Brad. It was an unknown number with a New York area code. I knew who it was. I did not answer. I let it go to voicemail. Then 5 minutes later, my mother's name flashed on the screen. Then my father's. Then Brad's. The phone vibrated against the table like an angry insect. The silence was over. The screaming was about to begin. The phone stopped ringing. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the static electricity of a coming storm. I sat in my living room, the porcelain cup of tea warm in my hands, and I waited. I did not have to wait long. To understand the sheer magnitude of the disaster that was currently unfolding across town, you have to understand the man my parents had sold the books to. Mr. Sterling was not a hobbyist. He was not a casual reader. He was a shark in a bespoke suit. He was a man who had made his fortune in corporate acquisitions, a field where mercy is considered a weakness. He collected African American history not out of love, but out of a desire to own the unownable. He demanded perfection. I knew exactly what was happening in his private study at that very moment, because I knew the man he had hired to authenticate his new purchase. His name was Marcus. Marcus was a colleague of mine, a fellow archivist who could spot a forgery from across a crowded room. He was meticulous, humorless, and brutally honest. Mr. Sterling had flown him in from New York that morning to catalog the collection for insurance purposes. I could see the scene in my mind as clearly as if I were standing there. Marcus would have put on his white cotton gloves. He would have laid the first book, The Weary Blues, onto the velvet examination table. Mr. Sterling would be standing nearby, swirling a glass of expensive scotch, waiting to be told how brilliant he was for acquiring such a treasure. Marcus would have opened the cover. He would have felt the paper. And then he would have frowned. Paper from 1926 has a specific texture. It has a smell. It has a weight. The paper in Catherine's facsimile copies was high quality, yes, but it was modern. It was acid-free. It was smooth. It was industrial. Marcus would have pulled out his jeweler's loupe. He would have looked at the ink on the title page. He would have seen the dot matrix pattern of a digital printer, not the heavy-pressed indentation of a letterpress. Then he would have turned to the copyright page. The page that my mother had never bothered to read. The page that Brad, in his arrogance, had ignored. And there, in small, crisp print at the bottom, he would have read the fatal words. Facsimile edition. Printed in China, 2010. I imagined Marcus taking off his glasses, cleaning them slowly, and looking at Mr. Sterling. "I am sorry," he would say, "but these are worthless." I imagined the glass slipping from Mr. Sterling's hand. I imagined the color draining from his face, replaced by a flush of violent rage. And then the call. My phone lit up again. It was my father. Then my mother. Then Brad. The notifications stacked up on my screen like falling Tetris blocks. "Call me. Emergency. Pick up the phone, Naya. Pick up." I took a sip of tea. Earl Grey. It tasted like justice. I did not answer. I let the voicemail catch their panic. I wanted them to sit in it. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in. According to the voicemails that I would listen to later with a glass of wine, the conversation between Mr. Sterling and my father had been brief and catastrophic. Desmond, Mr. Sterling had said, his voice dropping to a register that was colder than liquid nitrogen. "I am looking at the collection you sold me." My father, likely sitting in his recliner in front of the home theater, probably smiled. He probably thought he was about to receive a compliment. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Magnificent, isn't it? My granddaughter took great care of it." "You sold me counterfeits," Sterling interrupted. I can hear my father's stutter from here. "Counterfeits. No, no, there must be a mistake. Those are family heirlooms. They are printed on cardstock from 2010. Sterling roared. "The expert is here. He says the binding is glue, not thread. He says the signatures are printed, not signed. You sold me $50 worth of decorative paperweights for $200,000. Desmond, sweating now, heart racing, would have tried to pivot. He would have tried to use the charm that he thought worked on everyone. "Well, look, if there is a misunderstanding, we can discuss a refund. I mean, we might have spent a little of the money, but we can work out a payment plan." And that was when the trap snapped shut. Mr. Sterling did not want a payment plan. Mr. Sterling did not want an apology. Mr. Sterling wanted blood. I am not interested in your money, Desmond Sterling said. I am interested in justice. You used the United States Postal Service to mail me the contract. You used a wire transfer to accept the funds. Do you know what that is? Silence on the line. That is mail fraud. That is wire fraud. That is a federal crime. I have already called my legal team. They are drafting a referral to the FBI as we speak. I don't want a refund. I want to see you in handcuffs. Click. The line went dead. And in that moment, the home theater, the vacation to Cabo, the designer bags, the arrogance, it all turned to ash. My phone rang again. This time I looked at the screen. It was Bianca. She left a voice message. I played it on speaker. Nia, frantic, screaming. Nia, pick up the FBI. He said the FBI. Brad is throwing up in the bathroom. Dad is having chest pains. You have to fix this. You are the expert. Tell him they are real. Tell him it is a mistake, Nia. I deleted the message. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was dark. The streetlights flickered. They were coming. I knew they were coming. They could not handle this over the phone. They needed to find someone to blame, and I was the only target left. 10 minutes later, headlights swept across my living room wall. I heard the screech of tires. Not one car, but two. The Range Rover and my parents' sedan pulled into my driveway at an angle practically jumping the curb. Doors slammed. I heard running footsteps on the concrete. I unlocked the front door and stepped back, waiting. They did not knock. They pounded. It was the sound of people who were drowning and trying to break down the door of a lifeboat. Nia, open the door. Open the damn door. I opened it. The sight that greeted me was almost pitiable. My father, usually so composed in his suits, was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt stained with coffee. His face was gray. He looked 10 years older than he had 2 weeks ago. My mother was crying, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. She was clutching her purse like a weapon. And Brad, the confident, arrogant real estate mogul. He was pale, shaking, sweating profusely. He looked like a man who had just seen his own ghost. Bianca was behind him, holding her stomach, sobbing hysterically. They pushed past me into the living room, bringing the smell of fear and desperation with them. "Fix it!" my father screamed, spinning around to face me. "You have to fix it!" "Fix what?" I asked calmly, leaning against the doorframe. "Mr. Sterling," my mother shrieked. "He called. He says the books are fake. He says he is calling the feds." "Fake?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "But how can they be fake? You said they were valuable assets. You said you were a negotiating genius, Dad." "Don't play games with me, Nia," Brad shouted, his voice cracking. He stepped toward me, his hands balled into fists. You knew they were fake. You set us up," I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "I set you up," I asked. "I wasn't even in the state when you sold them. I didn't sign the contract. I didn't verify the authenticity." "You did, Brad. You are the agent, remember? You are the business expert." Brad flinched as if I had slapped him. "He is going to send us to prison, Nia," Bianca wailed, collapsing onto my sofa. "I am pregnant. I can't go to prison. They will take my baby." My mother grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Nia, please. You have the real ones, don't you? You must have them. You are the archivist. You wouldn't let them get thrown away. Give them to us. We can drive them to Sterling tonight. We can swap them out. We can say it was a mix-up. Please, Nia, save us." I looked down at her hand on my arm. I looked at the desperation in her eyes. For years I had wanted this. I had wanted them to need me. I had wanted them to see my value. But now that it was happening, I felt nothing but disgust. They didn't want me. They wanted my assets. They wanted a get-out-of-jail-free card. I pulled my arm away. "I don't have them," I lied. The room went silent. What my father whispered. "I don't have them," I repeated, my voice steady. "You sold the collection. You emptied the shelves. You told me they were gone. Why would I have them? But—" "Catherine." My mother stammered. Catherine said she switched them. She said she put the real ones under the bed. I shrugged. Catherine is 8 years old, mother. She has an active imagination. Maybe she thought she switched them. Maybe she just switched one toy for another. Or maybe… I paused, letting the silence stretch. Maybe she was just telling you a story. Just like you told her a story. About how you were selling her inheritance for her own good. Brad let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands. We are dead, he moaned. We are dead. We spent the money. We can't pay him back. How much is left? I asked. Brad looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Maybe 5,000. $5,000. Out of 200,000. In 2 weeks. They had spent $195,000 on a home theater, a vacation, and luxury goods. And now they were facing federal charges with $5,000 in the bank. My father looked at me, his eyes pleading. Nia, you have savings. You have your retirement fund. You have the money from the settlement with your ex. Help us. We are your parents. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sat in a leather chair and told me that my history was trash. I looked at the man who had let his son-in-law humiliate me in front of 50 people. I walked over to the table and picked up my tea. I am sorry, I said. But my money is tied up. I am renovating my house. Remember, I need a sanctuary. You ungrateful little witch, my mother screamed, lunging at me. We gave you life, and you stole my daughter's future, I shouted back, my voice finally rising, finally breaking the calm facade. You stole from an 8-year-old. You lied. You committed fraud. And now you want me to bankrupt myself to save you from your own greed. No, I pointed at the door. Get out. Nia, my father started. Get out, I screamed. Get out of my house. Go home and wait for the FBI. Maybe you can watch a movie on your big screen while you wait for them to kick down the door. They looked at me with shock. They had never seen me like this. They had never seen the daughter who fought back. Slowly defeated, they turned around. Bianca helped Brad to his feet. My mother wiped her face, shooting me a look of pure venom. My father just shook his head, looking like a broken man. They shuffled out the door, back into the night, back to their impending doom. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I leaned my back against the wood, breathing hard. My heart was pounding. I had lied. The books were in the bedroom, safe in the Lego bins. I could have saved them. I could have ended the nightmare right then. But I didn't. Because the nightmare wasn't the books being lost. The nightmare was them. And the only way to wake up was to let them hit rock bottom. I walked down the hall to Catherine's room. I opened the door quietly. She was asleep, clutching a stuffed bear. I sat on the edge of the bed and stroked her hair. We are safe, baby, I whispered. We are safe. But outside, the sirens were already starting to wail in the distance. And I knew with a grim satisfaction that they weren't coming for me. The pounding on my door eventually stopped, but they did not leave. Through the peephole, I could see them sitting on my front porch steps like refugees. My father had his head in his hands. My mother was staring blankly at the driveway. Brad and Bianca were arguing in hushed, venomous tones near the railing. They were broken. They were terrified. And they were exactly where I needed them to be. I checked the time. It was past midnight. I unlocked the deadbolt and the sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet house. I swung the door open. You can come in, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. But you will sit where I tell you to sit, and you will speak when I tell you to speak. They shuffled inside. Gone was the swagger from the housewarming party. Gone was the arrogance of the luxury vacation. They looked small. They looked like children who had broken a priceless vase and were waiting for the belt. I pointed to the sofa. They sat huddled together, a pathetic tableau of a family destroyed by greed. I pulled my armchair around so I was facing them directly. I sat down, crossing my legs and interlacing my fingers over my knee. I looked at them. I let the silence stretch until I could hear Brad's ragged breathing. So I said softly, "Tell me exactly what Mr. Sterling said." Brad wiped his face with a shaking hand. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "He gave us a deadline, Nia. He said we have 24 hours. He wants the 200,000 back, plus a $50,000 penalty for breach of contract and damages. He said if the money is not in his account by tomorrow at 5 p.m., he is handing the file to the FBI. $250,000, I repeated. And you have 5. Bianca let out a sob, clutching her stomach. "He said he is going to charge Brad with interstate fraud," she wailed. "He said Brad will go to federal prison for minimum 5 years. Nia, please think of the baby. I cannot raise 3 kids alone. I cannot be a prison wife." My mother leaned forward, her mascara smeared around her eyes, making her look like a raccoon. "Nia, you have to help us. You are the only one who can talk to him. You speak his language. You are an expert. Call him. Tell him it was an honest mistake. Tell him we are not criminals. Tell him we got confused." "Confused?" I asked, tilting my head. "You were confused when you emptied my shelves. You were confused when you spent the money on first-class tickets. You were confused when you mocked me in front of your friends." Brad slid off the sofa onto his knees. The man who had called my history trash was now kneeling on my rug, begging. "Nia, please. I am begging you. Just write a letter. Write an official appraisal saying that we had reason to believe they were real. Say that even experts could be fooled. If you say it, he might drop the fraud charges. He might just treat it as a civil dispute. You can save me, Nia. You are the authority here." I looked down at him. He wanted me to use my professional reputation to cover up his crime. He wanted me to perjure myself to save his skin. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "You want me to tell him it was an innocent mistake?" I asked. "You want me to tell him you valued the collection?" "Yes," Brad breathed, hope flickering in his eyes. "Yes, exactly." I tapped the screen. "I don't think he will believe me, Brad. Because I have proof of what you really thought." I pressed play. The sound of the housewarming party filled the room, the clinking of glasses, the laughter, and then Brad's voice, booming and confident, amplified by the speakers of his beloved home theater. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to my sister-in-law, Nia. Without her donation of those old books, none of this would be possible. So let us give a round of applause to the involuntary donor of the year." I watched their faces as they listened to their own arrogance. Brad went pale. My mother flinched as she heard herself laughing in the background. We had to clear out the dead weight. Who reads dusty old books anymore? It is so depressing. To the trash heap of history, I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavier than before. "Trash heap of history," I repeated. "That is what you called it. That is what you sold. You did not think it was valuable. You thought it was garbage that you could turn into cash. You did not care about the provenance. You did not care about the author. You only cared about the price tag." Brad slumped back against the sofa, defeated. "You recorded us," he whispered. "I did. Georgia is a one-party consent state, Brad. I learned that from a lawyer. Just like I learned that selling counterfeits across state lines is a felony." My father spoke for the first time. His voice was raspy. "Why, Nia? Why did you let us do it? Why didn't you stop us?" "Because you wouldn't have listened," I said. "If I had told you the books were fake 2 weeks ago, you would have just found another way to hurt me. You would have sold the house. You would have stolen something else. You needed to learn, and the only way you learn is when you lose everything." Bianca was rocking back and forth, weeping. "We are going to lose the house. We are going to lose everything." "Yes," I said. "You are." Suddenly the door to the hallway creaked open. Everyone turned. Catherine stood there. She was wearing her pajamas, holding a large rectangular object wrapped in a thick velvet cloth. She walked into the room silently, her bare feet making no sound on the wood. She looked like a ghost. She looked like justice. She walked past her grandparents who were too ashamed to look her in the eye. She walked past her uncle who was kneeling on the floor. She came to stand next to my chair. She placed the bundle on the coffee table. With slow, deliberate movements, she unfolded the velvet. There they were. Their eyes were watching God. The Weary Blues, Mules and Men. The original first editions. The leather was cracked and worn. The gold lettering on the spines was faded. They smelled of vanilla and almonds and thyme. They were beautiful. My mother let out a gasp. She reached out a trembling hand. "They are real," she whispered. "You have them. Oh, thank God. You have them." Brad scrambled up, looking at the books like they were a life raft in the middle of the ocean. "Catherine," he cried out, tears streaming down his face. "You saved us. You saved us." "We can give these to Sterling. We can give him the real books. He will drop the lawsuit. He will drop the charges if he gets what he paid for." He lunged forward, reaching for the book on top. Catherine's hand shot out. She slammed her small palm down on the cover of the book. "No." Brad froze. "What?" "No," Catherine said again. Her voice was not the voice of a child. It was the voice of Nana Rose. It was deep and final. "You cannot have them." Brad looked at me frantic. "Nia, tell her. Tell her to give them to us. This is my life we are talking about." I looked at my daughter. I looked at her hand, protecting her legacy. "I cannot tell her anything, Brad," I said. "They are not mine. They belong to her." Nana Rose left them to Catherine. Not to me. Not to you. To her. Catherine looked at Brad with eyes that were terrifyingly calm. "You sold the ones on the shelf," she said. "You sold the paper. You sold the trash. You didn't sell these." "But we need them," Bianca screamed from the sofa. "We need them to pay the debt." "That is not my problem," Catherine said. She picked up the book, clutching it to her chest. "You wanted a theater," she said. "You bought a theater. You watched your movie. Now you have to pay for the ticket." My mother began to wail, a high-pitched sound of pure despair. "Nia, please, make her understand. If Brad goes to jail, if we lose the money, we will be destitute. We will have nothing." I stood up. I walked over to the table and began to wrap the other books back in the velvet. "You won't have nothing, Mother," I said calmly. "You will have each other. Isn't that what you always preached? Family is everything, right?" I handed the bundle to Catherine. "Go back to bed, baby. Lock your door." Catherine turned and walked away. She did not look back at the people crying on the floor. She carried her history with her, safe and sound. I turned back to them. "You have 24 hours," I said, checking my watch. "I suggest you start selling things. Sell the Range Rover. Sell the jewelry. Sell the home theater. Maybe if you liquidate everything you own, you can come up with enough to keep Brad out of prison. But the house," my father stammered. "The market is down. We can't sell it in a day." "Then I guess you better start calling a bail bondsman," I said. I walked to the front door and held it open. "The show is over," I said. "Get out." They dragged themselves up. They looked like ghosts. They walked out into the night, weeping, arguing, already blaming each other. Brad stopped at the door. He looked at me one last time. "You are a monster," he whispered. I smiled. "No, Brad," I said. "I am just the person who read the fine print." I slammed the door. I locked it. And then for the first time in years, I breathed. I really breathed. The air in the house was light. The heavy, suffocating weight of my family's expectations was gone. I walked to the window and watched their taillights fade into the darkness. They were driving toward a future of bankruptcy lawyers and court dates. I turned off the porch light. I walked back to Catherine's room. She was sitting on the bed, reading. She looked up and smiled. "Did they leave?" she asked. "Yes, baby, they left." "Are they coming back?" "No," I said, kissing her forehead. "I don't think we will be seeing them for a very long time." Catherine nodded. She turned the page of the book. It was a first edition. She handled it with care, with reverence. Good, she said. I like it better this way. It is quieter. I sat there listening to the sound of the page turning. It was the best sound in the world. It was the sound of history surviving. It was the sound of a story that was finally ours to write. The sunlight in my new sunroom is different from the light in my parents' house. It is cleaner. It is brighter. It filters through the large bay windows and lands on the rows of custom-built cedar shelves that line the walls. There are no porcelain dolls here. There are no massive television screens dominating the space. There are only books, hundreds of them. And in the center of the room, on a velvet cushion, sits the collection that started a war. It has been 6 months since the night I kicked my family out of my house. 6 months since the house of cards finally collapsed. And while silence usually implies peace, the silence from the other side of town has been the silence of a graveyard. Mr. Sterling was a man of his word. He did not accept an apology. He did not accept a payment plan. When the deadline passed and the money was not returned, he unleashed a legal blitzkrieg that would make a shark tremble. He filed a civil suit for damages and breach of contract, but that was just the opening salvo. He also followed through on his threat to contact the authorities regarding the interstate wire transfer. The fallout was swift, and it was brutal. Brad was the first domino to fall. The real estate board does not look kindly on agents who sign fraudulent certificates of authenticity. When the charges of fraud came to light, his license was suspended immediately pending an investigation. The investigation did not take long. The paperwork he had so arrogantly signed became the nail in his professional coffin. He was stripped of his license and fired from his firm. The man who prided himself on being a mogul is now uninsurable in the industry. He avoided prison time only by taking a plea deal that required him to pay massive restitution and serve 3 years of probation. But his career, the identity he built around his success, is dead. My parents fared no better. The lawsuit from Mr. Sterling drained them dry. To pay the settlement and the legal fees, they had to liquidate everything. The irony is almost poetic. To pay for the crime of selling a legacy, they had to sell their own. The brick colonial house in the affluent suburb is gone. I drove past it last week. There was a sold sign on the lawn, but it was not a celebratory sale. It was a distress sale. The neighbors told me there was an estate sale before the move. Strangers walked through the rooms picking over the furniture. They bought the dining table where my father used to lecture me about money. They bought the sofa where my mother used to judge me. And the home theater. The state-of-the-art cinema that was supposed to be the envy of the neighborhood. It was dismantled and sold for pennies on the dollar. Used electronics do not hold their value. The massive screen that played the superhero movie was hauled away in a truck, leaving behind nothing but holes in the drywall and a mountain of debt. My parents now live in a 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. It is a far cry from the country club lifestyle they cherished. They do not host parties anymore. They do not brag to their friends. They are isolated, trapped in a small space with their regret and their blame. And Bianca, the golden child, the sister who mocked me for reading. With Brad unemployed and a third baby on the way, the reality of their finances hit them like a freight train. They lost the McMansion. They lost the luxury cars. They moved into a rental property not far from my parents. A friend of mine sent me a photo recently. It was taken at a local discount grocery store. Bianca was working the checkout line. She looked tired. She looked older. She was scanning items for a customer wearing a uniform that was a size too big. I did not laugh when I saw it. I did not feel a surge of malicious joy. I just felt a profound sense of balance. The universe has a way of correcting itself. She wanted a life of ease funded by theft. Now she is learning the value of $1 the hard way. I have not spoken to them, not once. For the first few weeks my phone rang constantly. They called from different numbers. They sent emails begging for help. They sent flying monkeys relatives I hadn't seen in years to guilt-trip me. But family is supposed to help family, they said. I told them the truth. I helped them by letting them face the consequences of their actions. If I had bailed them out, they would have never learned. They would have just found another way to exploit me. I blocked the numbers. I returned the letters unopened. I instituted a strict no-contact rule. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, but it was also the most necessary. I cut away the rot so that the healthy tissue could survive. My father once told me that everything has a price. He was right. The price of their greed was their lifestyle. The price of their betrayal was their daughter. They paid in full. Now the only family I focus on is the one sitting in front of me. Catherine is sitting on the window seat bathed in the golden afternoon light. She is holding their eyes. We're watching God. She is reading the passage where Janie Crawford discovers her voice. She looks up at me and smiles. It is a genuine smile. The weight of the secret is gone. The burden of being the guardian is gone. She is just a child again, but a child who knows exactly who she is. Mommy, she says, do you think Nana Rose is watching? I look at the books on the shelf. I look at the dust motes dancing in the light. I think she is always watching baby, and I think she is finally resting easy. I walk over and sit next to her. I pick up a book from the stack. It is a collection of poems by Langston Hughes. I open it to the page where he talks about dreams deferred. My parents deferred my dreams for a long time. They tried to make me small. They tried to make me invisible. But they forgot that history is written by the survivors. I look into the camera lens that I have set up on the tripod. I have started documenting this journey. I have started sharing the story of the collection, not just to brag, but to warn. My family wanted a show. I say to the lens, my voice steady and strong. They wanted high-definition drama. They wanted a spectacle. Well, I gave them one. I lean back in the chair surrounded by the smell of old paper and the warmth of a home that was built on truth. I gave them a real-life movie, I continue. It had a twist ending they never saw coming. It had a villain who thought he was the hero. And it had a hero who looked like a victim until she stood up. They wanted to watch a tragedy on a big screen. Instead, they lived one. And the price of admission was everything they owned. I reach out and stroke Catherine's hair. She leans into my touch, secure and loved. We are not just keepers of the books anymore. We are the authors of the next chapter. And this chapter is titled Freedom. I look directly into the lens, my expression serious. So I have to ask you, if you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have saved the people who tried to erase you? Or would you have let them sink under the weight of their own choices? Would you choose the appearance of peace or the reality of justice? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have ever had to stand up to a family that underestimated you, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to know that their worth is not negotiable. I am Nia. This is Catherine. And we are signing off to go read a very good book. The screen fades to black. But unlike my parents' home theater, the story doesn't end when the power goes out. Our story is just beginning.